So welcome everybody to our panel. I'm honoured to be tasked with moderating this. We have Shai from Mayo Ventures, we have Greg from Medtronic, we have Lisa from American Heart Association, and we have Brad from GE Healthcare. So welcome everybody. And Lisa, I'm going to start with you. We'll get right into it. So we've seen the wave of health tech companies. Is there anything unconventional flying under investors' radar that you're aware of?
It's the health tech. Lisa was just talking about it, how much that's changed. I remember, probably 15 years ago, working some with Abbott on some health tech strategy, which they promptly shelved because they weren't really ready for it. And I think a lot of med tech wasn't really ready for it. Now I think some of the biggest opportunities are really that intersection of device and tech and services. I mean, if I think about the companies that I'm most excited to see, it's those that are leveraging all of those things together, and not just a one-time surgical experience or a home monitoring system or any one piece of the continuum, but things that really integrate across the healthcare system. And it's confusing to companies and especially acquirers because of the complexity of the reimbursement that you need to understand and get familiar and comfortable with. But it's certainly the way healthcare should be delivered, and I think those are the biggest opportunities.
Cool. And Shai, I'm going to go to you. So coming from Mayo and tasked with bridging innovation with patient care, how is Mayo pushing that innovation to focus on the patient care?
So with us, it's not always about the trends, right? It's about what are the gaps in care that we realize. Mm-hmm. And so coming from practice, we know what is missing. So we always try to push innovations towards what we need as Mayo Clinic, if it's a medical device, if it's software. And the way we do that, so obviously we're very good friends with the strategics all over and our Rolodex of investors. And the idea is, let's find a gap and then, build those groups of the startups, of the investors, of the strategics, of Mayo KOL, and together build those, basically the horizon of what's next to come. We know that, we have to put our money where our mouth is. So we support innovation financially pretty heavily, mm-hmm. both internally. So we have funds from ventures to put into innovation at Mayo Clinic to bridge the gap from ideation to commercialization. But obviously, we work with the strategics and we work with startups, which we are able to invest in startups. So no money, no mission. Basically, work together with the startups to have their product either improved or pivoted towards what we believe at Mayo is a gap in care. So we're able to invest in companies that work together with us.
That's super, super. Greg, I'm going to come to you. So with your role in business development strategy at Medtronic, could you share any insights on how M&A activities are shifting within the cardiovascular landscape? And then what are the key factors driving those changes, in your opinion?
Yeah, I would say the one that I'll point to is we're taking a bit more of a tops down, meets bottoms up approach to M&A. Oftentimes we have really, really great ideas in one individual business, and it might make sense for that general manager to pitch a deal and try to work that up the system. We're trying to match that with where the spaces across cardiovascular that Medtronic needs to play in and needs to win in. And so that becomes a bit of a filter criteria for what types of deals we're looking at. And then it also gives us a bit of a lens on what structure could we consider for those types of acquisitions or investments. And one of the things that we're really focused on these days is we have a pretty strong pipeline in Medtronic across the next 3-5 years. We're trying to start to plant some seeds for what happens year 6 to year 10. We'll continue to iterate on the platforms that we have, but we recognize that there is so much unmet clinical need in cardiovascular. And we're really just at the start of some of these big waves like hypertension with our platform, to really then think about what comes next after that. And that may result in not an acquisition today for Medtronic, but maybe it's partnering with our venture capital group and focusing on an investment, really getting a seat at the table with those startups. So it's shifting a little bit. I would say just the takeaway for me is we're trying to be a little bit more diligent about spaces because we realize that when we dabble with small acquisitions and small spaces, they tend to be the ones that if things go awry, there's a bump in the road, those are the opportunities that end up being deprioritized for something else. And so we recognize that the big ones and the small ones often take a lot of the same amount of effort. And so let's focus our effort on the ones that can have the biggest impact for the company.
And Brad, so as Director of Strategy and Corporate Development at GE Healthcare, how do you anticipate corporate development strategies affecting future deals? And again, same as Greg, what trends should stakeholders be most attentive to?
Sure, Lisa. I'm going to answer it from a perspective that would be most relevant for the startups and venture community in the audience here. So I think I saw a recent statistic from John Norris's Venture Healthcare Report. I think last year, 1 out of every 6 or 7 acquisitions by a strategic were done by strategics that already had a minority stake in that target. And if you think about the big companies that have been most successful in recent history, Boston Scientific is a perfect example. They have a very intentional and programmatic approach of planting a venture garden, placing multiple bets on goals in the verticals in the categories that they care about. I think that fact pattern in the last decade or so, I think that as the success proof points continue to build, I think the industry has taken notice, and I think more and more strategics will be putting more effort into thinking about and crafting a venture strategy that supports their M&A pipeline. It's not easy to do, right? You need to have top to bottom, alignment, and there needs to be a strong intent. It needs to be driven by strategy, and you need to have a strong risk tolerance and patience, because these things never go in a straight line. But I do think the trend is moving in that direction. And granted, there will be, it is a pendulum, depending on which strategic and the P&L swings and mood, right, from quarter to quarter for public companies. But I do think that the broad direction is trending in that way. And, when done right, strategic ventures can yield a pretty strong strategic results. So, that, and I would encourage, for the startup community, venture community here, I would encourage you to, engage in those conversations with strategics early on, not when you're trying to raise money or trying to sell, but engage with them early on and find out what are the areas that they're interested in, what would be the milestones that they want to see in order for them to, take a serious interest in acquisition or even, funding the company. I think that would go a long way in helping kind of the ecosystem going forward.
As the former head of GE Ventures Healthcare Fund, in its last form, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
I love it. So just touching on what you were saying, and this goes also to you, Greg. I've had the luxury of working in Medtronic in a business unit, in Becton Dickinson in corporate, and Yenovalve as a small company. And I'm always interested to, what I can learn and what I can understand. And my time at Yenovalve was interesting to me. Like, what are strategics looking for in smaller companies? Because I think some of them think, okay, we have to have our preclinicals done. We have to have our design history files all buttoned up. We have to have our clinical trial on the way. But what do you guys look at? And I know there's probably no secret sauce, but it would be nice to hear. Do you know what I mean? What makes sense from a strategic and why they start looking at smaller companies to acquire?
I can take a step first. Yeah, sure. So I think first it really starts with the strategy of the startup, and what is the unmet need you're going after? How big is the opportunity for that? And then we recognize that no startup is going to look like the internal processes of Medtronic. We often want them to, and when we send diligence request lists and it comes with 700 questions about your quality system, we apologize. But I do think there's a role for the startup where the startup has a much better opportunity to move fast than some of what we can do within the strategic. So you kind of have that long-term vision of what is the unmet need you're trying to solve for. And then what is the accelerated path to get to de-risking events? So it may be getting to an animal study. It may be getting to your first in human study. And for us, what we're looking for is proof points along the journey, recognizing that we're never going to be able to retire all risk in a deal across the life cycle. And the last thing I'd mention is just be very intentional about some of the decisions you make on manufacturing, on suppliers. Things that we worry about a lot at the very end of the deal is, what are we going to have to redo? What are we going to have to revalidate? What are the test methods we're going to have to go look at again? Because ultimately, what we want to do is be able to acquire a company and immediately get into the commercialization phase. So I'll maybe echo what Brad said, that have the conversations early. We're always open, even if it's, hey, I've got a napkin sketch and this is what I'm thinking about. Can you get some advice? Go ahead and reach out. I mean, it never hurts to develop that relationship very early. And then as, you start to get more details around your plan, that ends up being a really good touch point for what are we going to talk about at our next meeting.
Listen, this is actually a pain point for us at Mayo. So Mayo Ventures is both the tech transfer office for Mayo and also the investment arm. And we work with our clinician on innovation. And oftentimes we would get this amazing innovation through our door, but we don't necessarily know how to assess the market for it. Okay. So what we do is we work pretty closely with the strategics, literally with all of them, to basically sit together and guide our innovators to how do we make a good fit of the innovation coming out of Mayo Clinic that eventually will be housed within the strategics. We all know that at the end of the day, to really reach the patient bedside, it has to come through the strategics. We rarely see those startups tapping into big distribution networks by their own or going through regulatory approval, everything without the help of a big organization. So, I mean, I can give one example of how we do it. We have our incubator fund with Boston. It's Motion Medical, where we have IP coming out of Mayo, coming out of Boston. We work together to advance the technology, eventually spin out the companies out of it. It's funded by Mayo and Boston. So that just one example of how we do it. We work with all the other strategics as well. And we welcome innovation at Mayo Clinic that's not only originating from Mayo. So this is a shout out. If you have some innovation that you want Mayo Clinic input on, come to us. We'll work with you. I mean, we have clinicians really, really thirsty to work on a new innovation. And as said, we bring IP, we bring cash, and obviously the network of Mayo Clinic. So we have our investors and our relationship with the strategics. And if it's vetted by Mayo, obviously it goes a long way. So it is a pain point to realize if this is a good business fit. And that's where we need the investors and the strategics help to realize that and obviously communicate it back to our clinicians.
I think it's a really good point, Shai, because one of the things that we do, we're not an acquirer, obviously, of companies, but we are a funder of companies. We have 4 separate venture programs, and a couple of them have medical device real focus to them, as long as they're related to cardiovascular, brain health, and all the cascade of related conditions. And that can be anything from metabolic or autoimmune or, even endometriosis and other things that cause elevated risk of heart attacks and stroke. We also have a venture studio, so we're interested to collaborate in the founding and creation or co-creation of companies. And because we have such a sort of broad view into the market, and, most of the cardiovascular clinical world is connected to us in some way, and the neurologic, clinical world is connected to us in some way, not just in the U.S., but globally. We have this amazing network of people that we can bring into the mix to ask questions of and help guide companies. And in addition to that, we have partnering arrangements where we can bring some of the assets that we have to bear for companies. So we have clinical trial services and clinical trial design capabilities. We have data, lots of data. We have clinical guidelines and care pathways and things that people are integrating into their products. So we have lots of different resources and assets that we can partner with companies to help them improve the clinical validity and scientific basis of what they do, and also the usability. And since we also come with a consumer perspective of things as well, we have a very broad set of tools to work with companies around. So we're always eager to collaborate, even if it's not a venture deal, which we'll do too. But interesting collaborations that we're entering into. We have a couple we're going to announce in the next few months.
So from my perspective, to add to what my fellow panelists have said, I think in order to make a program or innovation successful and to be able to bring it to market, right, I think a number of elements are indispensable. Number one, you need the unmet need. Number two, you need the funding. And then you need a commercial model. I think without one of the, any one of these, that's not going to be a successful program. And there are a lot of innovations and products that fit those three buckets, but we were chatting during breakfast this morning with Shai, but they could be looking at a very advanced catheter in the morning, but then in the afternoon they could be looking at, hey, we need a better bed, and that's an example where the product category is very small, right? The market opportunity is probably small, and you probably can't attract venture funding. There is an unmet need, but you probably can't attract venture funding. But how does that going to work? So that's where I think strategics can step in and say, let's do a build to buy or whatever, and address that, fill that gap. So I think for strategics, it's important for us to not just work with the venture community and the startups out there, but also, work closely with the other ecosystem players like Mayo Clinic or American Heart Association to understand what the unmet needs are and where we could plug the gaps where there isn't venture funding and help figure out the business model for products like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We realize at Mayo that not any innovation that comes out of Mayo is worthy for a new company formation or so. So what we do pretty often is our clinicians come up with an idea, we assess it at Mayo Ventures, and we realize, all right, this might not be a standalone company, but if we take the existing product already out there on the market and work together with the commercializing company to actually make the 2.0 version of that product with Mayo Clinic IP into it, we'll make patients' life better, right? So we would approach either the strategics or a manufacturing company out there. It can be like an operating table, it can be a cath lab probe or something, and we'll work with them. It will come to them. We have this idea. We think that we at Mayo would use it if you pivot it this way or not. And so it's, as I said, not a standalone company, but an add-on to an existing product. And we're really we're here for impact. So we truly care about the patient impact rather than ROI. It's not that we don't care about ROI, we do, but it's mainly impact. So if we can make patients' life better and work with an existing company to actually get their product to a different stage that we believe Mayo will use, and obviously if Mayo uses it, then the rest of the world might. So we're very open to it, and even if you guys have an idea, the companies out there that could improve an existing product from another company, work with us. We'll make it happen.
You're doing very well, Shai. That's twice now you've reached out. Hey, if you have ideas, please come and talk. You're willing to work. So I think that's really important. I want to shift it a little bit because we all see what we term as the constantly changing regulatory landscape. How does that affect, how you're looking at strategic investments or M&A? Or does it? Because Lisa.
Yeah, the regulatory landscape. Huh. Well,
that's a fun topic.
I have it on my Etch-a-Sketch, it depends on the sector, right?
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of attempts, I think, to make it simpler,
Mm-hmm.
But we at the Heart Association anyway, don't ever want to lose our sight on scientific rigor. And so for us, the regulatory pathway is the regulatory pathway. It's Lord knows every day what it might be. But since we're dealing across the spectrum of medical devices and health tech, and also where those things come together. And that's probably the most complicated, where it's a device and it's also got some sort of algorithmic something. And, those are very confusing, I think, for the regulatory agencies. I think the other aspect of regulatory is the changes that are happening around services and licensure and all of the things about who can do this or that service or prescribe what and do what, different types of things in different types of places. And we keep our eye pretty keenly on that. And that's very much in flux right now, how those things work. So it's part of the diligence process. It's not, if you've been in this industry a long time, like most of us have, it's not scary. It's just there, and you got to deal with it and prepare for it and fund accordingly, because there's always uncertainty there. And every entrepreneur I see says, okay, our clinical trial is going to enroll in 6 months of the data. And then, on January 3rd, it'll be done. You're like, yeah, okay. So planning for the uncertainty, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Let me just add that it's not new, right? I feel like everything is always in flux and everything is changing. So change is the constant here. I don't really think it necessarily changes our focus areas for what we're looking for. And honestly, I think, I try to assume good intent. It's not like regulators are the enemy and you're trying to, find a creative way through. Everyone's trying to work on getting good technology to patients. And yes, certain geographies may look a little different than others, but I do feel like, having that underlying assumption of good intent across the partners you work with tends to be an attitude that at least moves things forward instead of just a lot of frustration.
Super. So,
but building on what you just said for a minute, which is not a regulatory comment, that different communities look different. I think that's a big focus for us and I think a big opportunity for people is figuring out how to solve the problems of access in communities, including in Rochester, where it takes 3 weeks, you were saying, to get certain appointments, or, in every community, access is becoming more complicated. In rural communities, it's becoming impossible. And so what solutions are there in any form, whether they're devices, that travel, or they're virtual services, or there's some, combination of things that can do work in different places, and while this problem is becoming worse and worse in the U.S., much less the rest of the world. So it's an opportunity to think about in your strategy, which you may not have thought about, is how you solve problems of access. And I think related to that is problems of cost. I think med tech, isn't used to, as some of the other parts of medicine have been used to thinking about how to make it economical and reduce the price. And that is a win, in today's market, is you can figure out how to do something not just better, but more inexpensively, and put your stake in that, ground. It's a good thing.
Yeah, you touched on another very important point. So access to care, that's all over. So most of the patients of the world don't live in Rochester, Minnesota, and they still need good care. And one of the things that we work really hard on is access to care at home. If that's through different devices that you could acquire automatically, either an echo test or an ECG, and basically interpretation from far. Those are things that are close to our heart, and if we can improve that, we're doing a good job, but not enough. I think that's an untapped market for sure.
So this is where on the point of access to care, I think the overall, I'm seeing overall big theme of, trying to move, the care setting from inpatient to outpatient at home, right? That generally speaking, that's a big theme that's going on. And, AI is a big part of it. And we're at the nascent stages of the AI kind of.
That AI, they have to take a drink.
That's what we agreed on during breakfast. So, I think AI will play a big part of it, but we're at the very nascent stages, in terms of, for me, clin, reg, reimbursement all tie together, all go hand in hand. And for AI, I think we're seeing a lot of innovation, right, that address workflow improvement, efficiency in the care setting, and moving the care, towards more, democratizes the care. But I think for strategic, we want to see, in order for us to become truly interested in owning an AI and really implying it to our customers broadly, we want to see, very clear clinical evidence that supports the value. But we also want to see, a clear regulatory pathway. And also there needs to be a viable path towards reimbursement. But I think the FDA and I think regulatory authorities all over the world are still trying to figure out what are the right ways of managing those.
Yeah.
But you're seeing like early proof points of success. HeartFlow, got their reimbursement, one of the first AI applications that got a reimbursement. So I think we're getting there. But one advice that I would give to startups that leverage AI is, I think we see a lot of products with, innovative ideas and, really good clinical proposition. But when you dig deeper, you realize that data privacy and data rights are a mess. And that fundamentally prevents an acquirer from moving forward. And because when you're when you're data privacy non-compliant or you don't have the right data rights, when you're a small company, yeah, you can fly under the radar. But when a GE Healthcare or a Medtronic or, a big company buys them, we're going to be on the hook. We're going to draw attention and there could be negative consequences. So make sure that, you have the right data rights. You get the right data privacy documents signed by the patients that consent to your trials and provide you with the data. I think that'll go a long way, to making it a lot easier for the strategics.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I always say to my teams is the burden of proof on a strategic is a lot higher than it is on a startup or even a mid-sized startup. Do you know what I mean? Because again, you're able to have the interactions with the regulatory bodies. You're working with them, as opposed to the strategic that the FDA, for example, or another regulatory body would be expecting, okay, you have all your ticks and ties done. You know what I mean? So the burden of proof is a lot higher. And it's interesting, Shai, knowing how you're pushing with Mayo, to embrace and to work with, how are you seeing that regulatory landscape working for you guys? Do you think the burden of proof is higher or lower?
That's a very good question. It's not only the regulatory, it's also the reimbursement. So I'll echo what I'm saying.
Yes.
If I hear another company saying that their AI their AI can solve global warming, I'm going to lose it.
Drink.
So the thing is, and Mayo has been a trailblazer in AI, especially in ECG and in echo, right? So and when we first started getting, all these inventions coming through our door, we spent so much money filing patents on AI. And you know what? It's really hard to enforce AI algorithms. It's not about the code. It's not about the AI. It's about the data that you trained your algorithm on. Obviously, with Mayo, we have pretty good data to train our algorithms on. But at the end of the day, people will get data, all right? Mayo is not the only organization in the world with data, and there are other hospitals around the world. So when we assess, is an AI solution really going to be a healthy financial model, then we have to understand a few things. One is, does the development of this algorithm have a differentiator from anyone else in NYU or in Colombia, but, developing another AI solution? Usually not. I mean, the algorithm that you develop with Mayo Clinic is not much different than the algorithm you develop elsewhere. But at the end of the day, if you pair it with a company or a solution that's been, completing it in terms of maybe the access to the distribution network or the acquisition of the test. And so that's the big differentiator here. Another thing that we have to make sure is that at the end of the day, who's going to pay for this? We're getting reimbursed for a certain solution, but as we move forward with AI, the reimbursement landscape is going to change. We're not going to get the same reimbursement for interpretation of a test as we do as the human eye is doing it. If the AI is doing it, eventually we'll get paid less. Yes, we will broaden the patient pool. We'll be able to have more access. But at the end of the day, it still has to be a healthy financial model, regulatorily and reimbursement.
Sense. So I know we've 30 seconds left. Is there any final comment from any of you guys that you'd like to share?
I'd just reiterate with working with strategics, kind of engage early, engage often, and recognize that it's okay to say, I don't know the answer. That's why they're doing the innovative work. So if it's, chances are that the market projections you're putting on a slide we're probably not going to believe, but that's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know, I'm studying that. We're trying to figure that out. And I think we can probably help push that along.
I think also open your mind to different business models. I think the world is really changing here. And the traditional pay for device that's disposable thing is not necessarily going to be the way it always is. And especially when the software starts integrating with devices and the like, companies have to think about different business models that they're not comfortable with or not used to. They have much lower margin potentially, or much higher margin depending on what they are. And the IP is different. Often there's none, I think, to Shai's point, on software, and that's okay too, because it's, you may have noticed there's some big software business out there worth a lot of money anyway. So.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for turning up. Thank you, panelists. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. Thank you.